Yeah, so I suppose you can all see my screen. So today we have a very beautiful passage to begin with. We have a very important passage which speaks about the last judgment. The last. When the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, then he will sit on his glorious throne. Before him will be gathered all the nations, and he will separate them one from another, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And he will place the sheep at his right hand, but the goats at the left. Then the king will say to those at his right hand, "Come, O blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry and you gave me food. I was thirsty and you gave me drink. I was a stranger and you welcomed me. I was naked and you clothed me. I was sick and you visited me. I was in prison and you came to see me." And the righteous will answer him, "Lord, when did we see thee hungry and feed thee, or thirsty and give thee drink? And when did we see thee a stranger and welcome thee, or naked and clothe thee? And when did we see thee sick or in prison and visit thee?" And the king will answer them, "Truly I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of these my brethren, you did it to me." Then he will say to those at his left hand, "Depart from me, you cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me no food. I was thirsty, and you gave me no drink. I was a stranger, and you did not welcome me, naked, and you did not clothe me, sick and in prison, and you did not visit me." Then they also will answer, "Lord, when did we see thee hungry or thirsty or a stranger or naked or sick or in prison and did not minister to thee?" Then he will answer them, "Truly I say to you, as you did it not to one of the least of these, you did it not to me." And they will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous into eternal life. If you look at this passage, we see here very clearly Jesus giving us instructions about the final judgment and what will be the criteria. And the main criterion is love of neighbor. Have we loved our neighbor? The only criterion that Jesus is looking at. That's why St. John of the Cross will say, "In the evening of our life, we'll be judged by love." So the only condition that is needed for us is how much we have loved our brothers and sisters, especially the least, not the popular people, not the well-known people, not the rich, but those whom we consider insignificant, unimportant, ignored by society, looked down upon. These are the kind of people that Jesus expects us to minister unto, and we will often overlook them. They are not even part of our lives. They are not anywhere in our circle. And so we just overlook them, ignore them. And finally, when we come face to face with God, that's the question he's going to ask. "I came to you in the form of an unknown person, unimportant person. Why didn't you minister unto me?" Very important question for us to reflect upon. If God is going to ask me this question, then I need to constantly become aware of this truth that here I am in this world to serve, especially those who are uncared for, who are not thought about, who are not recognized by society or by anyone. And Jesus is present in them. And Jesus expects us to notice them, to care for them, and to love them. We have the lives of the saints, we have beautiful examples. For instance, you have Francis of Assisi. We have a classic example of Francis of Assisi, who was a very rich man, a noble man. He was going on his horse one day, and suddenly, as he was going on the horse, he saw a leper. The leper looked terrible with all his wounds and pus and all that. You couldn't even look at him. But suddenly, Francis had this urge to go and just embrace him. So he runs towards the leper and he embraces him and takes him in his arms. And suddenly he sees the face of Jesus in the face of the leper. Another beautiful example is Martin the Tour. Saint Martin was again a soldier who was going on horseback, and one winter evening, one winter night, he sees a beggar shivering in the cold, blue. His body is gone blue and close to death, shivering and naked. And of course, Martin was already a Christian, so he got off the horse, took off his cloak, cut it into two, and put half on the beggar, and he sped away. That night, Martin had a dream, and in the dream, he saw beautiful angels, and then he saw Jesus sitting somewhere, and Jesus was sitting, and he was wearing a half a coat, and Martin was able to recognize that coat. And then the angels approached Jesus and they asked him, Master, whose coat is this? And why are you wearing just half a coat? And Jesus tells them, it was given to me by my friend Martin when I was shivering in the cold. Then Martin realizes that it was Jesus who came to him in the form of a beggar. You see, we may not see Jesus in all these people. You see, Mother Teresa saw Jesus, saw the face of Jesus in the people she ministered to. She was able to see the face of Jesus because she was constantly mindful of God's presence in all of humanity. And this is our calling. It's not something very difficult, it's not complicated, it's not technical. It's for anybody. Showing love is something that all of us can do. And that is what God expects of us. He doesn't expect us to solve some complicated mathematical problems or eradicate poverty or do big things. All he wants us is to do simple things like visiting someone who is sick, someone who is in prison, feeding the poor, giving some word of comfort to those who are in need. These are things which we often overlook, and we don't even consider them important because we are so caught up with our own lives. God wants us to look at the other, to open our eyes and our hearts to all those in need. Very important. You know, sometimes we help people who are well to do because we know, they will somehow pay us back, if not in cash, in kind. And so we generously go out and help them. That is not help. That is what we call disguised selfishness. You see, because you expect something in return. Remember another parable Jesus says, where he says, when you throw a feast, when you have a party, don't invite your rich neighbors or relatives, but rather invite the blind, the lame, the maimed, because they cannot repay you, but you will be repaid at the resurrection of the just. Another beautiful parable of Jesus. So we are always called to look at those who are ignored by society, uncared for by society. Thousands and thousands languishing in prisons, suffering in hospital, suffering with diseases at home, or people without food or shelter. These are the kind of people we need to look at, recognize them as sons and daughters of God. And when we do something for a child, the father is happy, right? So all these are children of God. So when we reach out to them, God the Father really appreciates our work. When we don't expect any reward in return, we don't expect anything in return. It's just that we go out and serve them because we are filled with God's love. That is what Jesus is looking at. Very often, when we go for confession, also, we talk about the things we have done, the sins we have committed. I did this, I did that. What God expects of us is that we care for people, and when we don't do that, that becomes a sin of omission. That is why in the I confess in the Mass we say, for what I have done and what I have failed to do. We often don't talk about the failed to do. That's why Jesus gave us the parable of the Good Samaritan, where two people just walked by, ignored this man who was lying down almost half dead. They just ignored him. It's only the Samaritan who took pity on him, and Jesus applauds him. You see, very often we are caught up with so many things we ignore those who are in need. And Jesus appreciates us when we do this, not because of some reward that we're going to get, but because we do it out of love. And we do it, we're not going to be recognized by anyone. There will be absolutely no human recognition. In fact, we may not even get back gratitude in return from these people whom we are ministering to. But we are doing it because of God's love that is there in our hearts. And we reach out in love. When we do this, we become unself-conscious. It becomes a habit. We don't even realize it. That's why uh, these people will ask Jesus, Lord, when did we see you hungry or naked? I mean, we didn't even realize that we are doing it. Like Jesus says, let not your left hand know what your right hand is doing. So we do it unself-consciously. We do it as if it's second nature to us. And when we begin to do this unself-consciously, it becomes a habit. And then when we finally when we meet the Lord face to face, we will realize that our lives have been beautiful. And that is when the Lord will be able to tell us, enter into the joy of your master. Come, O blessed of my Father. Beautiful words that we would love to hear from the mouth of God. So let's look at ourselves and ask ourselves, where am I? Am I standing will I stand on the right or on the left? If I'm going to stand on the right, then my whole life needs to be one of loving service, of generosity. If my life is filled with the selfishness, filled with only my, and I, then we have no room for outsiders. But today, Jesus invites us primarily to reach out in love. And when we do that, definitely, there's a great reward. In fact, that is the whole purpose of our life, that we minister to one another, especially to those who are in need. This is our calling as Christians. And when we do this, we imitate Jesus. Chapter 26, when Jesus had finished all these sayings, he said to his disciples, you know that after 2 days the Passover is coming, and the Son of Man will be delivered up to be crucified. And the chief priests and the elders of the people gathered in the palace of the high priest, who was called Caiaphas, and took counsel together in order to arrest Jesus by stealth and kill him. Okay, so with this, the sayings of Jesus, everything is over. Now we enter into the Passion. Chapter 26 and 27 will speak about the Passion. 28 will go to the resurrection. So here we have Jesus who is going towards his death. After Jesus speaks about his suffering, now he finally goes into Jerusalem, where he will be arrested, where he will be killed, and he will rise again. So uh, Jesus very clearly, openly says, the Son of Man will be delivered up to be crucified. And meanwhile, we have the chief priests and the elders who are now plotting against Jesus, and they are uh, thinking how to arrest him and how to put him to death. This plan is going on, but they said, not during the feast, lest there be a tumult among the people. Now, this is very important. You see, there are about 4 million people. There are about 4 million people who come every year to Jerusalem, to the temple for the Passover. And if there is any commotion, then, you know, it will be very dangerous, especially for these high priests, because the Romans will overthrow them. They cannot continue as high priests. Of course, the Romans will take charge. They will, uh, quieten the crowd. They will do all that. But then, if there is a riot, if there is any problem, the chief priest will be replaced. And Caiaphas has been a chief priest for many, many years. And so he doesn't want to lose that position. That's why he says, not during the feast. Let's do it after the feast. Because if Jesus is arrested now, there will be a commotion and then there will be an uprising because he is a popular person, and therefore we'll do it very quietly and we'll do it after the Passover. Now, when Jesus was at Bethany in the house of Simon the leper, a woman came up to him with an alabaster flask of very expensive ointment, and she poured it on his head as he sat at table. But when the disciples saw it, they were indignant, saying, why this waste? For this ointment might have been sold for a large sum and given to the poor. But Jesus, aware of this, said to them, why do you trouble the woman? For she has done a beautiful thing to me. For you always have the poor with you, but you will not always have me. In pouring this ointment on my body, she has done it to prepare me for burial. Truly I say to you, wherever this gospel is preached in the whole world, what she has done will be told in memory of her. Now, this story is reported in Matthew, Mark, and John. Okay, but in Luke, there is a slightly different story. We have a story of Mary and Martha, and this Mary is the one whom Jesus had forgiven because she was possessed and he was forgiven. So we are not very clear about this lady who was there. And there he is at another Simon's house. Here it is Simon the leper. There is Simon the Pharisee in Luke. So anyway, what is important is here is a woman who was so touched by Jesus that she shows her love. For love, there is no cost. The woman doesn't think about the cost. See, the cost of this ointment, it says very expensive. It was about 300 denarii. It was almost 1 year's salary for a worker. Imagine 1 year's salary. But the woman did not care. For her, she wanted to give the best to Jesus. When you really love someone, when you really care for someone, no, you don't think about how much something costs. You want to give that person the best. And so you go all out and get something that the person would really appreciate or admire. And so here she thought, this is something that I can give to Jesus. And she takes this, many of these Jewish women, they'll have this small flask hanging around their neck, and they will have some perfume with them, but not anything of this caliber, because This particular ointment is extremely expensive. It comes from the Himalayas, and as I told you, it's about 300 denarii, which is a lot of money for an ordinary person to afford. It's like 1 year's salary. You see, when Jesus was in the desert wanting to feed the people, uh, Philip asked Jesus, Lord, should we buy bread for 200 denarii to feed them? You see, 200 denarii was a lot of money. And here, this one has used 300 denarii, which means you could have fed 5,000 people easily with that money. So, such an expensive ointment she pours. Why? Because she loves Jesus. She has been forgiven. She has experienced God's love, and she pours it on Jesus. And Jesus is so taken up, and he says, wherever the gospel is preached, this story of what this woman has done will also be proclaimed, because she has done a beautiful thing for me. Jesus appreciates this act of love. See, disciples think it is a very expensive thing. Why waste money and all that? Why not give the money to the poor? And Jesus quotes what many of the Jews always say, you always have the poor with you. You will always have opportunity to serve the poor. Poverty will never be eradicated, as it were. But you will never get an opportunity again like this. You see, opportunities like this come probably once in a lifetime. Having to serve Jesus like this, she will never get another opportunity. So here she capitalizes on this chance, and she pours her heart out to Jesus, as it were, gives the best that she can, and she is beautifully appreciated by Jesus. Wherever this gospel is preached in the whole world, what she has done will be told in memory of her. It must have made such an impact on Jesus, and he is able to say this. And one of the 12 was called Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priests and said, what will you give me if I deliver him to you? And they paid him 30 pieces of silver. And from that moment, he sought an opportunity to betray him. We have this character of Judas. You can probably look at three reasons why Judas betrayed Jesus. First was avarice, greed, love for money. John in his gospel says Judas was a thief, a robber. Right from the beginning, he was stealing money from the treasury, from the little money that they had in their kitty. So, one reason was that he was a man who was really greedy for money, and he would do anything for money. Second thing was disillusionment. You see, he belonged to this category of what we call the zealots. The zealots always carried a knife in their pockets, and they were looking forward to the redemption of Israel, where the Messiah would come and drive away the Romans. And when he saw Jesus becoming very popular, he thought, yes, Jesus is the Messiah. Jesus will overturn the Roman rule, and he will establish his kingdom. Now, Jesus was not going according to the plan of Judas. Judas had a plan for Jesus, but Jesus was doing God's plan. So very often, we want our plan to be executed, and when God does something, we are a little surprised, or we are sad, disappointed. Now, Judas wanted his way. He had his way of his idea of the Messiah, and when that did not happen, he was disillusioned, and he was frustrated, he was angry, and he wanted to do away with Jesus. The third possibility is that, he did not really want to kill Jesus. He was angry with Jesus, and he just wanted to uh, let Jesus go and get caught. And then, after he is caught, Jesus will begin to act. He will do something, because now Jesus is not going at a pace he expects. Jesus is going very slow. He doesn't seem to be doing anything to bring about his kingdom. And so what do? I push Jesus into the forefront. I push him into the limelight so that he begins to act. That is what Judas thought. And so he kind of gets them into the center. He brings them to the leaders of Israel to see whether Jesus will, exercise his authority and power there, and do something, and then something will happen, and the kingdom will be established faster than what Jesus is going to do now. That was probably his plan. We don't know. And so he goes and tries to betray Jesus. But whatever the reason, finally we know that after he saw that Jesus was not going to just be caught and arrested but going to be killed, he could not digest it. And tremendous remorse came over him. You see? So he will finally commit suicide. So we'll come to that a little later. So here we have this man who delivers Jesus, being with Jesus for 3 years all along. His mind has not been clean, has not been pure. He's been very sinister. He's been having vested interests. And so we see his nature coming out at this moment. 30 pieces of silver. Verse 17. Now, on the first day of unleavened bread, the disciples came to Jesus saying, "Where will you have us prepare for you to eat the Passover?" He said, "Go into the city to a certain one and say to him, 'The teacher says, my time is at hand. I will keep the Passover at your house with my disciples.' And the disciples did as Jesus had directed them, and they prepared the Passover." So here is Jesus who has already planned everything. If you read the other Gospels, you will find that Jesus had made a very clear plan, given instructions to these people who were taking care of this place, this house, and he had given them a password. Everything was done. So everything was well organized by Jesus. So it's not a very ad hoc situation. It is something that Jesus had well planned. And so the disciples are able to go there and prepare the Passover. And when it was evening, he sat at table. He reclined at table with the 12 disciples. And as they were eating, he said, "Truly I say to you, one of you will betray me." You can imagine what is going through the mind of Jesus and what is going through the mind of the disciples as well. You suddenly hear this from the master. He says, "One of you will betray me." This is a very happy occasion. They're coming together for the Passover meal. And Jesus is saying, "One of you will betray me." They were very sorrowful and began to say to him one after another, "Is it I, Lord?" See, very innocent. They don't know. Absolutely no idea. See, Jesus knew. Jesus knew from the beginning. And Judas knew. And although he was there, he never ever showed that he was going to betray Jesus. Never spoke about this to anyone. And yet Jesus is still filled with love for him. Jesus is not angry with him. Jesus does not shout at him, make any remarks. Jesus is very quiet about it as well. Only thing is, he is very sad in his heart that somebody is going to betray him. He doesn't even say who it is. He answered, "He who has dipped his hand in the dish with me will betray me." This dipping your hand in the dish with me, this is done by someone who is very close to the host. You see, the host will invite someone who is very close to him to dip his hand while he is dipping it in the dish. And that is what Judas does. He comes and dips his hand with Jesus in the dish. Imagine, no, the kind of person that he was. He shows as if he is very close to Jesus, very intimate, very friendly, and yet he's going to betray him. So see what Jesus says. The Son of Man goes as it is written of him, but woe to that man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would have been better for that man if he had not been born. Terrible words, no? Judas, who betrayed him, said, "Is it I, Master?" Imagine, no? Judas has the audacity because he doesn't want to show that he is the actual person, he is the criminal. Judas looks as if he is very innocent and he asks Jesus, "Is it me?" Like all the others were asking, Judas also asks as if he doesn't know, "Lord, is it I? Master, is it I?" Jesus said to him, "You have said so." Even then, Jesus doesn't directly answer. He says, "You have said so." As they were eating, Jesus took bread and blessed and broke it and gave it to the disciples and said, "Take, eat, this is my body." And he took a cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, saying, Drink of it, all of you. For this is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. I tell you, I shall not drink again of this fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom. So here is Jesus saying, "This is the last time I'm going to have the Passover with you. After this, it will only be in my Father's kingdom, when we will all be united together after our death, after this earthly life." You see, so Jesus is very clear about it. He knows that they will all be martyred, they will all come to him. So we shall not drink again here on earth until the day when we drink it new with the Father. So these words of Jesus must have been very powerful, no, when they heard it, and a kind of sadness must have filled their hearts. When they have this drinking of the cup, there are actually 4 cups. 4 times they will drink. So it's in remembrance of what was done in Egypt to them. So there are 4 cups. 4 times they will drink. So this is probably the third time they are drinking. This is the third cup, and Jesus is telling them, "We will not drink it again until we drink it in the kingdom with my Father." And they would have had uh, these 4 times of drinking, and then finally what happens is they had sung a hymn. They went out to the Mount of Olives. They go to the Mount of Olives. So this Passover is a wonderful ceremony. I've explained it several times. You see, what happens is uh, the youngest child in the family will ask the eldest person that is gathered. So it will probably be a grandfather or a grand uncle, and the child will ask the grandfather or the grand uncle and say, "Tell us uh, what happened to us when we were in Egypt." And this person will have to narrate the whole story of how they escaped from slavery, how they were spared from being killed, how the lamb's blood was smeared on the doorpost, and how the angel came and passed over their houses, how they crossed the Red Sea. All these stories will have to be narrated. See, these were narrated, handed down orally for centuries. Only later it came to be written on these manuscripts, no? But for centuries it was handed down orally, and that is a custom. And so the same thing would have also happened here when Jesus was there. He spoke about the Passover and how God has been merciful to the Jews and how he saved them from certain death, from slavery, and brought them into this free country. So after listening to all this, they sing a hymn of thanksgiving, and Jesus and his disciples go to the Mount of Olives. And Jesus said to them, "You will all fall away because of me this night. For it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. But after I am raised up, I will go before you to Galilee." They won't understand all this about Jesus being raised and all that. They don't understand. So Peter declared to him, though they all fall away because of you, I will never fall away. Peter is that kind of person, who says, no, I'll do anything for Jesus. I will, and he's very, very vocal and very impulsive, and he just says something. And Jesus said to him, truly I say to you, this very night, before the cock crows, you will deny me 3 times. Peter said to him, even if I must die with you, I will not deny you. And so said all the disciples. So when Peter said this, the others also said, yeah, Jesus, don't worry. We won't deny you. But Peter is very vehement. He says, no, I'm a strong man. How can I deny you? Even if all the others deny you, I will not deny you. See? So that was Peter when he spoke. But let's see Peter in action. And Jesus went with them to a place called Gethsamane, and he said to his disciples, sit here while I go yonder and pray. And taking with him Peter and two sons of Zebedee, that is James and John, he began to be sorrowful and troubled. So he takes the inner circle, the core group. So remember, these three were there on the mount when Jesus was transfigured, no? And also when Jesus raised the daughter of Jairus. These were the three who were always with Jesus, Peter, James, and John. So they are the inner circle, they are the core group. And Jesus takes them a little closer to where he was going to pray. And he said to them, my soul is very sorrowful even to death. Remain here and watch with me. And going a little farther, he fell on his face and prayed. That's the way the Jews prayed, no? So he falls on his face and prayed, my Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as thou wilt. So it is late in the evening, and Jesus goes and he begins to pray, and he knows this is the last time he's going to pray because he will soon die. His death is imminent. He is able to perceive it, and that is why Jesus is very sorrowful even to death. See, he is able to recognize that his hour has come and he cannot do anything about it. And so he goes to his father and he says, Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. You can imagine Jesus was constantly preparing himself for this death, for this particular event. And yet, when the time comes, he is still, a little shaken. And that is why he says, Father, if it's possible, let this cup pass from me. You can imagine the kind of weight that must have been on his shoulder, on his heart, on his soul. On the one hand, he knows I must accept the Father's will. On the other hand, there is a human side where he says, I want to escape. If it's possible, let this cup pass from me. If I can win redemption for the world without going through this agony, Father, if you can do it, do it. Yet, he says, not as I will, but as thou wilt. That is what we need to learn from Jesus. Completely yielded to the Father's will. No, he knows it is painful, it is heavy on him, it is terrible, but let the Father's will be done. That is what Jesus will always say. He says, I've come to do the will of him who sent me. And my food is to do the will of him who sent me. That was Jesus. His food was to do the will of the Father. And here he is doing the Father's will, accepting the cross. Very soon he'll be crucified. And he is ready for it. Yet there is the human side which is telling him, try to escape. But Jesus says, no, Father, your will, let your will be done. And he came to the disciples and found them sleeping, and he said to Peter, so could you not watch with me 1 hour? Watch and pray that you may not enter into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak. You guys want to be with me. You guys want to pray with me. You have that desire, but yet your flesh is weak, he says. You're not able to sit with me. Don't yield to the temptation. He says, watch and pray, watch and pray. Again, for the second time, he went away and prayed, my Father, if this cannot pass unless I drink it, thy will be done. Same words, rephrased a little, that is all. And again he came and found them sleeping, for their eyes were heavy. So leaving them again, he went away and prayed for the third time, saying the same words. So 3 times Jesus goes and he prays to the Father, saying, Father, if it's possible, let this cup go away, yet not my will, but your will be done. And now Jesus is mentally prepared to face the cross, to face all the shame and ridicule, and then the cross. All that is going to happen now. And he came to his disciples and said to them, are you still sleeping and taking your rest? Behold, the hour is at hand, and the Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us be going. See, my betrayer is at hand. See, Jesus is so aware of what is going to happen, and as he knows, he can see in the distance a crowd, and he knows that Judas is leading them. While he was still speaking, Judas came, one of the 12, and with him a great crowd with swords and clubs from the chief priests and the elders of the people. Now the betrayer had given them a sign, saying, the one I shall kiss is the man, seize him. And he came up to Jesus at once and said, Hail, Master, and he kissed him. Now we have this question, the chief priests and the scribes, they have seen Jesus in and out for so many months, for 36 months. So why should they come to him like this? They want to meet Jesus in a secret place, and this is the right time to catch him, because as I told you, if they can catch Jesus in public, there will be a commotion. So they want to catch Jesus by stealth. And when to catch him? When it is dark. And where they don't know his hideout. They don't know his whereabouts in the night. They may know his whereabouts during the day, where he comes usually to talk, to preach, to heal, and so on. But where he goes in the night, they don't know. Each day will be different. That is why they employ Judas. Judas knows exactly the plan of Jesus, where he will go and what he will do. And so they employ Judas, who will take them to Jesus in the night. And of course, there are these guards and others who do not know Jesus. And that is why Jesus, he says, I'll give you a sign. Now, what is interesting is that in the Greek, the gospel in Greek, this kiss is not just an ordinary kiss by a friend. It's the kiss that is given by someone who is very intimate with you. Oh, that's the kind of kiss that Judas is giving Jesus. And he said, Hail, Master, and he kissed him. So even there, he's kissing Jesus as if he is very close to him. And yet his heart is full of treachery. Jesus still addresses him as friend. He says, Friend, why are you here? As if he doesn't know. See, friend, why are you here? Then they came up and laid hands on Jesus and seized him. See, even there, Jesus doesn't say one word to Judas. He doesn't admonish him at all. You see, for Jesus, Judas is still a friend. And behold, one of those who were with Jesus stretched out his hand and drew his sword and struck the slave of the high priest and cut off his ear. So in Mark's gospel, you will find it is Peter who struck the slave's ear, and then Jesus does the healing there. He heals the slave. So his name is Malchus, all that we read in Mark. But here, one of those with Jesus drew his sword and struck the high priest and cut off his ear. And Jesus said to him, "Put your sword back in its place, for all who take the sword will perish by the sword. Do you think that I cannot appeal to my Father and he'll at once send me more than 12 legions of angels? But how then should the scriptures be fulfilled that it must be so?" But Jesus says, no, you don't use force. You take the sword, you will die by the sword. That is what we see in history as well. Anybody who wants to win a war by uh, killing, it could be a sword, it could be any weapon, it could be a gun, it could be a bomb. The end result will be only final total destruction. So nobody stops by just killing the other person. There will always be retaliation. There will always be bloodshed. And that is why Jesus says, "Put your sword back in its place, for all who take the sword will perish by the sword." So if you're going to start killing, you will also be killed. You see? So, and he says, "Don't you know that I have power? I have a lot of power. My Father can send his angels, but I don't want to do all that." He says, "How can the scripture be fulfilled? I have to go through this plan of the Father, and don't thwart that plan by trying to create a riot." Jesus put the sword back. At that hour, Jesus said to the crowds, "Have you come out as against a robber with swords and clubs to capture me? Day after day I sat in the temple teaching, and you did not seize me. But all this has taken place that the scriptures of the prophets might be fulfilled." See? So the moment they captured Jesus, the moment they took him away, all the disciples forsook him and fled. All the disciples, nobody was left. All the disciples forsook him and fled. So here comes the test, the acid test. Peter, who spoke so bravely, all the others who supported him and said, "Yes, yes, yes, we will also won't leave you alone." All these people were completely taken by surprise when they saw this crowd. They were filled with fear. They ran away. Not one person standing with Jesus now. All his so-called close disciples, the inner circle, nobody was there. They all ran away. They fled. You see, they fled for their lives. And those who had seized Jesus led him to Caiaphas the high priest, where the scribes and the elders had gathered. But Peter followed him at a distance. You see, he doesn't come close. They all know that something is happening to Jesus. They all ran away and they are following him at a distance. Jesus is somewhere there inside, but they're keeping distance. They don't want to be associated with Jesus. Peter followed him at a distance as far as the courtyard of the high priest. Going inside, he sat with the guards to see the end. See? Now the chief priests and the whole council sought false testimony against Jesus, that they might put him to death, but they found none, though many false witnesses came forward. At last, two came forward and said, this fellow said." You see the derogatory word they use, no? Jesus is a rabbi, he's a very respectable person, but they address him as fellow. This fellow said, "I am able to destroy the temple of God and to build it in 3 days." And the high priest stood up and said, "Have you no answer to make? What is it that these men testify against you?" Jesus knows what is happening. He knows the conspiracy. He knows that these are such useless fellows who are wasting his time. So Jesus doesn't bother to answer. Jesus was silent. But Jesus was silent. And the high priest said to him, "I adjure you by the living God, tell us if you are the Messiah, if you are the Christ, the Son of God." Now Jesus will open his mouth. Jesus said to him, "You have said so, but I tell you, hereafter you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven." So this has reference to the prophet Daniel which the high priest is very familiar with, the coming of the Messiah. And Jesus equates himself to that Messiah when he says, "You will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven." That is enough. The high priest tore his robes and said, "He has uttered blasphemy." Why do we still need witnesses? You have now heard his blasphemy. What is your judgment? They answered, "He deserves death." You see how suddenly Jesus, from being such an important rabbi, being such a respectable person, is now suddenly taken into a place where he is a nobody. You see, they treat him shamefully, they treat him whatever way they want. They call him fellow, they just hurl accusations at him, and they treat him in a very derogatory way. See, the high priest says, he has blasphemed and says, "What is your judgment?" He's asking these people. Who are all these people? They are all people who are very spiteful, and these are people who have been brought in probably even with some money to say what the high priest and the other leaders want to say. So they answered him, "He deserves death." They spat in his face and struck him, and some slapped him, saying, "Prophesy to us, you Christ. Who is it that struck you?" You see, here we have Jesus already being maltreated. You can see here how the situation has changed and how Jesus begins the passion. He has begun the passion, and how, you see how shamefully the passion has begun. He is now in the Sanhedrin, he is in the court, and he is in front of all the sinful people. He is the only sinless one, and they treat him so badly. They have no regard for him. They don't know who he is. They just want to do away with him. They're filled with jealousy, filled with anger, and you can imagine the situation. And that is why Jesus doesn't want to speak, and yet he utters the truth. He only speaks the truth when he says, "You will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven." He speaks the truth. And then you see all these ordinary fellows there laughing at him, spitting on his face, slapping him. You see, that is what happens to Jesus. Now, when you look at all this, you must realize that, what Jesus went through for our sake. He was so above all human beings. He was so dignified. He was the Son of God. He had his authority. He had that dignity within him. And yet, when he was with all these common people, Jesus never loses his calm. He never loses his self-respect. He stays where he is. He doesn't condescend. He doesn't talk back to them. He doesn't speak in their language. No. He keeps his silence. He keeps his level-headedness. And he just goes on. He speaks only when it is necessary. And he says the right thing. So I stop with this today. And we will continue in the next class.